So clearly, import dependency is a very big deal for China, 82%. So China, they're facing a decision. There's an international energy security system, that one I drew up, I outlined before with all those steps. You rely on the market. The market is guaranteed more or less by the dominant player. It's made in dollars. In the Gulf, the various countries that might one dominate the other and cause havoc in the market, it's the American Navy, the American Air Force, and troops that keep those people apart. China doesn't have a single aircraft carrier. The American Navy is the dominant force on all seas. They could join the system. Essentially, that system does protect their oil that comes home, obviously, right? But China has aspirations. It's probably the one country, significant country in the world that has aspirations of being able to independently project power, independent of the United States, or at some point to be able to stand up, at least locally, to the United States. So probably the idea of being dependent on your oil security on a system where the U.S. is the dominant player is not their imagination of where they want to go, right? So what do? They're facing a very similar problem that Japan faced. I'm not trying to be histrionic like there's going to be another world war or anything. I just want you to remember, why did Japan, in the immediate at least, attack the United States? When their access to oil was cut off, they went to the southwest to grab where the oil was, and they attacked because they were afraid the Americans could hit their flank when they were doing this, so they hit Pearl Harbor. All right? I'm not saying something like that's going to happen with China. I'm just saying that existential problem, energy problem that Japan faced, is not that different from the problem, as you can see, that China faces in the future, or now. So let's look at, this is where China gets their oil imports, 2008, 2009. Iran, about 425,000 barrels that year. What's that, 540 something? Yeah, 544 the next year. I think that's about 17%, if I remember the math, of their total imports. They have special deals with other people. They're trying to make sort of very special deals with Venezuela, for example. But because of various problems with Venezuela, you notice Venezuela dropped off the map and is in others here. That'll change in the future, but they'll come out strong again. So China has various aspects to how they're trying to build an independent, I would say, security system, a sort of transition to one. One is security of supply. They're building their own strategic reserve system. Now, let's get back. I'll try and intersect a little bit with sanctions. So China is getting about half its oil, its imported oil from the Persian Gulf. 500,000 barrels a day, which you see how much they produce overseas. That's significant, the 500,000 barrels a day from Iran. The hyperpower has a problem, has a disagreement with Iran, and the hyperpower has the prerogative of shutting down. Might not be wise, it might not be moral, who knows, but they can decide independently of calling up Beijing to shut down the exports of Iran. That could happen. Not only that, if there is a conflict, it's possible that the Straits of Hormuz could be shut for some period of time. And China is not part of the emergency supply system from the International Energy Agency. So what do? Well, this is from a couple, I wrote an op-ed on this in Middle East Economic Survey, so the data is from a few months ago, 2-3 months ago. But it's like 100 million barrels they got in here. And if you figure it out, if all their exports were cut off, that's like, a month they're doing pretty okay. So immediately they're going to be looking for oil from someplace else. So you have to go to the market. But everybody will be going to the market if something like that happens. The IEA will be delivering oil. What happens? Well, I know a few years ago, I don't know if many people noticed it, Henry Kissinger and other diplomats from Europe and other places have written op-eds. This one I'm thinking of was in the Washington Post, where he said, it doesn't make sense for China to be outside the IEA. It's good for everybody. If anything happened to China's supplies, China's place in the world economy would not only make China a basket case, it would ruin everybody. Why don't you join the system? Even if you don't want to join the system, I don't know if it's in the same op-ed, maybe make a deal with Japan. Japan gives you the oil, but they're in the system, they can get the oil. I just found it interesting that when China was getting very excited very agitated in a way that never had before, publicly opposing the United States, time when they, up till now, didn't want to cause trouble with the United States in these matters, said no, 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 no sanctions on Iran. And I can understand why they'd be so nervous. Many people thought this is a reflection of the birth of a multilateral world, the decline of the United States, this is the rise of the BRIC countries, and so forth. There may be aspects of that, but the picture I'm painting is you're really worried where you're going to get that 500,000 barrels, or maybe 50% of your imports if the straits shut down, especially if you're not on the list from the IEA. I just thought it was interesting that the person that went in mid-March, just before their attitude changed, to Beijing to talk to them was Henry Kissinger, and talked to the chief foreign affairs officer. I don't know what he talked about, but maybe it's what he had been advocating earlier. I'm sure there's other things. Maybe some of you know him, you could ask him, I don't know. But shortly thereafter, China comes on board. And it's interesting, apparently, I've learned some more details about that. It was interesting in that same time, starting around February, I think, March, exports from the UAE, and maybe other countries, but the UAE to China started increasing. And apparently, it looks like the administration jawboned the Saudis to lean on the UAE and so forth. The details aren't so important, to start producing more oil, and a lot of it's going to China. And the trajectory was that China was going to get about 500,000 barrels a day more oil. Isn't that interesting? That's about what they get from Iran. And suddenly there's, this is part of the process. There's other things about currency involved, I'm sure. But basically, China needs to be taken care of. Apparently, the administration, how they got them on board is by taking care of them in some way. Now, looking at this from China's point of view, I'll go through, well, let me go through this a little more. There are aspects of their idea of how to find security away from the American-dominated system, in their view, right? Equity stakes, go abroad and get equity stakes. That makes sense. But as I pointed out, there's a database. This is from the Heritage Foundation, interesting database, on Chinese investments overseas. These are actual contracts that were signed, okay? So the red is energy, and the other one is all other. And I'll tell you, in most of these places, it's overwhelmingly minerals, especially in Australia, Latin America. There's some places, Asia, where it's some telecom, but it's overwhelmingly minerals. And it's not that China isn't willing to invest the money lately, but you have to find places to invest it. It's not so easy. And they're making some headway. But you can see there's quite a heavy investment in the Caspian. In the Mideast, it's about 50-50, right? I'm sorry, I wanted to put the absolute numbers, but in any case,